2 Kings chapter 15 is where we are, and we're roughly halfway through the chapter. I'm just going to keep the back off of that because it fell off on me the other day, and it keeps falling off. So,
need some tape?
I'll be all right. Hopefully the batteries are in there well enough it won't shock me. I think these are still batteries, Chance, from the time that you brought a bunch of them up here. So if the batteries shock me, we're going to blame it on you. All right. 2 Kings 15, the deteriorating kingdom, is where we're at. And last week we were able to look at the reign of Azariah in chapter 15, verses 1 through 7. And I'll remind you, when it comes to Azariah, he's also King Uzziah that we read about. It specifically calls him Uzziah in 2 Chronicles. But he's the king who we see that it was in the year that he died in Isaiah chapter 6 that Isaiah would begin his prophetic ministry. But we read about him at the beginning of 2 Kings chapter 15 in Judah, and then we move to Israel. And we start to see just the rapid decline in Israel and how quickly it seems like these kings are beginning to change and how much fewer history we actually have of them, even when it was a king with a lengthier reign. But we looked at Zechariah's reign in chapter 15, verses 8 through 12. And then we talked about Shallum's reign in chapter 15, verses 13 through 16. And that gets us into specifically who we're going to be looking at starting today with Menahem. But as we do that, there is some specific information about Menahem that's mentioned in the reign of Shallum that we don't see within the record or the record of Menahem's reign in the verses that follow. So let's look at those verses together again, just to kind of refresh ourselves, the little bit of an introduction that we've had to Menahem, and then we'll move into it from there. So if you would, just start reading with me 2 Kings 15. We'll start in verse 13. Shallum, the son of Jabesh, became king in the 39th year of Uzziah, king of Judah, and he reigned a full month in Samaria. For Menahem, the son of Gadi, went up from Tirzah, came to Samaria, and struck Shallum, the son of Jabesh, in Samaria, and killed him, and he reigned in his place. Now the rest of the acts of Shallum and the conspiracy which he led, indeed they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. Then from Tirzah, Menahem attacked Tipsah, all who were there, and its territory, because they did not surrender. But therefore he attacked it. All the women there who were with child he ripped open. And that's our introduction to Menahem. That we see it begins with the fact that he had led a conspiracy and assassinated the previous king. And then he goes on and he's moving to different areas. I don't have the map this morning, but last week if you were here, maybe you remember the map that we put up where if it is Tipsah, that is way up north. There was also the possibility that some translators say that maybe it was Tapua, which would have been just a little bit southwest of Samaria. And so there's possibility either way there. But nonetheless, when he goes there, they won't surrender to him. And so he attacks them in a very brutal and violent fashion. And the bell kind of rang right at the end. And so we weren't able to obviously look at that much, and we don't want to look at that very long. But what it does, at least, is it shows us just how wicked and vile that Israel had become. That Menahem was acting just like all of those around him. That he was a king no different than the pagan and wicked kings around. And then that at least gets us into a little more of the history in his reign. So if somebody would now, go ahead and read for us 2 Kings chapter 15, and we'll just start with verse 17.
In the 39th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Menahem, the son of Gadi, became king over Israel and reigned 10 years in Samaria.
So of course we've already seen a little bit of him based on what we have in verse 16. But now in verse 17 it gives us more of that timestamp. It's in the 39th year of Azariah. Again, this is still King Uzziah. 39th year of his reign that Menahem becomes king, and he would be king for 10 years. But we don't really have a lot of his 10-year reign recorded for us. We have just a little bit and enough to let us know just how bad he truly was. And so that gets us then to verse 18. If someone can read 2 Kings 15 in verse 18.
He did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart all his days from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin.
All right, so if his actions toward those who did not surrender to him doesn't tell us enough about him, here it makes it pretty clear that he was an evil king. He was not a good king. He was following in the ways of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which also tells us that he was only going to be furthering the problem of false worship and idolatry within the land. And so he was evil in the sight of the Lord. But then this is the main thing that the king's focuses on as it relates to his reign. And that's what we'll see in verses 19 and 20 with the tribute that Menahem would pay. Somebody read verses 19 and 20.
Pul, king of Assyria, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver, that his hand might be with him to strengthen the kingdom under his control. And Menahem exacted the money from Israel, from all the very wealthy, from each man 50 shekels of silver, and 50 shekels of silver, to give to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria turned back and did not stay there in the land.
So it's during Menahem's reign that we find that Pul, the king of Assyria, comes against Israel. Now, Pul is just a shortened form of the name we're going to be reading here in just a little bit for this particular king, Tiglath-Pileser III. That is the big long name there, and his nickname, if you will. It's not really a nickname, but just the shortened form is Pul. And so he is coming against Israel at this point in time. And when he comes to Israel, you have the foreign king coming against God's people. How does Menahem respond? How much can I pay you for you to please leave? Right? Now, this is interesting to me because the first things that we read about Menahem tell us that he was a pretty violent and brutal man, that he was a bully, really. He goes against Shallum, and what's he do to Shallum? He kills him and takes the throne, takes the crown from him, and then he goes to Tipsah. Tipsah doesn't want to surrender to him. Well, he doesn't take money, right? They're not going to surrender. They're not going to pay anything to him. So what does he turn around and do? He brutally and viciously attacks them, even the women who were with children. So he's not a good man, and you wouldn't think this is the type of man who's just going to bow the knee before somebody else coming in against them. This should tell us something about the Assyrians and just how violent and just how brutal the Assyrians were. He didn't want anything to do with them. Pul comes into Israel, beginning to take land away, and so then you have Menahem saying, "Take all of my money, what can I give you so you will leave?" And of course we see where it is that he pulls the money from. Where is it that Menahem is taking the money? Where is he taking it from? All right, he's taking money from the very wealthy. From each man he took 50 shekels to give to the king of Assyria. Are people happy to just give money away like that? No. I mean, you start thinking about taxes, right? And there's always, of course, the big debate going on where, all right, well, let's just tax the wealthy, tax the rich. And, of course, we see how all of that plays out. Now, and I'm not talking about, political ideologies, anything like that. But you start talking about taxes and you talk about taking money away, whether it's from the poor, whether it's from the rich. Nobody likes doing that. And now here you have the king saying, I need 50 shekels of silver from every single one of you. I need the wealthy to be giving me money so that then I can take it to the king of Assyria. Obviously, that's going to create some problem within his reign between him and the people, but we don't really have record of how all of that was going to end up in the end for him. But if we look here at what's going on in the tribute that he pays, it seems to at least be successful at this point in time because Pul leaves the land. He takes the money. Of course, who's going to turn down the free money? So he takes the money from them and he leaves the land. But archaeologically, there is record, in fact, of Menahem paying this tribute. So this is a stela, and I've talked a little bit about what that is before. It's just kind of a monument type of a thing in a way that they had inscriptions, and sometimes you had pictures on there. So that's a picture right there of Pul. Again, that's Tiglath-Pileser III. But within this particular monument and artifact, there is the writing and inscription there that specifically states how Pul had received tribute from Menahem of Israel, and then Pul allowed Menahem to remain king in Samaria. So a lot of the ways that this would happen and the way that Assyria would operate is they would come in and threaten, and then if you would kind of bow the knee to them, they would let you remain king. It's just that someone from Assyria would kind of stay in the area and stay there and be reporting back to Tiglath-Pileser for him. But that's what Menahem did. Instead of standing up, instead of fighting, instead of turning to God, instead he says, well, what can I do to just pay you off, to get you out of here and get you off of my hands? But that's what we would expect from a wicked and an evil king. But this is at least some archaeological history just verifying and showing that all of this is in fact true. So we see Menahem's tribute. And then we get to verses 21 and 22 where we'll see the end of his reign. Somebody read verses 21 and 22 of 2 Kings 15 for us.
Now the rest of the acts of Menahem and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? So, man, that's hard to get out, I don't know why. Menahem rested with his fathers. Then McElyea, his son, reigned in his place.
Menahem, we find verse 21, of course, there is more that he had done in his reign, and it was the 10-year reign, so we know there was certainly more going on, but we don't really have all of that. But what we do have tells us the fact that Menahem was a bully, but at the same time, he was also a little bit of a coward, right? He was not going to turn to God when he needed to and stand up and fight like he should have, but instead he bowed the knee to Tiglath-Pileser III. And so there's more that he did. They could go and reference those things in the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. Then verse 22, we see that he is passed. He rested with his fathers. And it's interesting to see within all of this current history we're looking at least in this particular chapter, that Menahem is the only king of Israel who actually died a natural death at this point. All these kings kind of before and after him, at least in that immediate history, they were all killed and someone else came and took over. And so that's at least something interesting to note. Jim?
Was the Assyrians a lot more powerful people at that time? Is that the reason why he paid them the ransom or whatever?
That's part of it for sure. The Assyrians were they were very violent people. When you look into some of the minor prophets, there's some talk about what the Assyrians did, the way that they operated. One of the things that the Assyrians were known for is that they would lead people away by hooks. So they would essentially take fishing hooks, like big fishing hooks, and put it through the mouth and lead people. And that's just a small example of some of the things that they would do. So obviously, a man who's willing to pay them off, who's himself was willing to rip women open with children when they wouldn't surrender to him, tells us the Assyrians were pretty bad dudes. They were violent. And that's certainly a big reason why it is that Menahem would be willing to pay him off so that he didn't have to go through any of that. And also so that he could be able to stay king there, that he was just willing to kind of forego his power and let them begin to have more control. And that's something else to recognize in this, that when he's paying the Assyrian king off, they're still in Samaria, they're still in the land, but this is, beginning to get us to that point of captivity, right? That no longer really is it Menahem or the king of Israel calling the shots, but really now they're in subjection paying tribute to Assyria so that they can try to at least maintain some sense of freedom in Israel. Really, it's Assyria who's in control, but Assyria is just allowing the people to remain at this point. Do you have something, Jared?
Yeah, you see through the kings, you see some of them which would try and pay tribute like that, but typically they would turn back to their own treasury, to the temple treasury, rather than turning to the people. And I think it's kind of a distinction with him, almost like, well, we're going to hold on to what we have here, but we're going to make sure you pay, just to show that much more what kind of mindset he had. Just the difference there. Right,
yeah, he didn't want to use anything that was his. He didn't want to use what may have been in the nation's treasury, because of course he's going to be pulling from that himself and what he's taking care of and doing. But instead, like you say, we're going to pull from the people and just take directly from the people and give that way. And, I just wonder how everybody felt about him as king. And if they didn't like him, they were probably kind of too scared to say anything because he might just rip you open right then and there. But maybe if you were bigger than him, he might give you a little bit of money so you'd be quiet. I don't know. But that's Menahem's reign. And we see in verse 22 that he passes, and then his son Pekahiah reigns in his place. So we go to Pekahiah's reign now, verses 23 through 26. And we'll just have somebody start by reading verse 23 for us.
In the 15th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Pekahiah the son of Menahem, king over Israel in Samaria, and reigned 2 years.
So he becomes king in the 50th year of Uzziah's reign in Judah, and then he would reign for 2 years in Samaria. Now, concerning the type of king he was, verse 24 gives us insight to that. If somebody could read 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 24.
And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin.
He was no different than his father or from the kings before him, because he just continued in the ways of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel sin, and of course he is just furthering their sin. And then we'll have someone read verses 25 and 26.
Then Pekah the son of Remaliah, an officer of his, conspired against him and killed him in Samaria, in the citadel of the king's house, along with Argob and Ariah, and with him were 50 men of Gilead. He killed him and reigned in his place. Now the rest of the acts of Pekahiah and all that he did, indeed, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel.
2 years that Pekahiah reigned as king, but we don't actually see anything that he did right here. Instead, what it gets us to is it's moving us on to the next king, and we see how all of that's going to transpire. But we know whatever's done in the 2 years was not good, because we learn that he was in fact an evil king who did evil in the sight of the Lord. But at the end of that 2 years, or in the second year of his reign, then we find Pekah, the son of Remaliah, who was an officer of Pekahiah's, conspired against him, killed him in Samaria in the citadel of the king's house. And it tells us that he killed him along with Argob and Ariah, however you want to say the name, I don't know. And with him were 50 men of Gilead. We don't know who Argob and Ariah were. Perhaps they were maybe counselors to the king. Maybe they were some bodyguards for the king who were getting in the way of this conspiracy. Some have suggested that maybe perhaps Argob and Ariah were sons of Pekahiah, and so it's just finishing off the line right then and there. But whatever the case, Pekah was the one who went in and led the conspiracy and would become king in place of Pekahiah. So we don't even know why it is that he chose to do that. I wonder maybe if it's because he thought his name was better than Pekahiah's name. I don't know. He liked the shorter version of it. But Pekah instead becomes king, and then it gives us that kind of final summary statement in verse 26 about Pekahiah. All he did, indeed, they're written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. So they could go back and see those things that were done in the 2 years in their records, but we know at least that he was an evil king. And then we come to Pekah's reign. And so here with Pekah's reign, we have chapter 15, verses 27 to 31. So let's have somebody start by reading verse 27.
In the 52nd year of Azariah, king of Judah, Pekah the son of Remaliah became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 20 years.
Pekah's reign lasted for 20 years, and it began, as it tells us there, 52nd year of Azariah's reign in Judah. Then let's have somebody read verse 28.
And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin.
So was Pekah a good king or a bad king? He's a bad king, right? Just like all the others before him in Judah, just following in the footsteps of Jeroboam, furthering the sins of Israel. But we do know in the midst of this 20-year reign that there were some losses, that land was beginning to be taken away. That Pul, and again, Pul is Tiglath-Pileser, he had been paid off for a time, but now we're going to see that he starts to come back and begins to take land away from Israel. Somebody read verses 29. Well, there's a lot of weird names here. I'll read 29 and 30. It says, in the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Ijon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Genoa, Kadesh, Hazor, Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and he carried them captive to Assyria. So Tiglath-Pileser finally decided it was time to come and start taking some of the land and taking some of the people away to Assyria. He'd been paid off for a time, but now that time is up. Maybe it's the case that Pekah was not wanting to pay off the king of Assyria any longer. We don't know all of those specifics, but we do know that at this point in time in Pekah's reign, that Tiglath-Pileser had claimed the land of Assyria. I thought I had a map or the land of Naphtali for Assyria. Thought I had a map in there. Evidently, I forgot to put it in, so that's my apologies. But chances are in the back of your Bible, you may have a map there that gives the 12 tribes. And if you look at the area of land that was allotted to Naphtali, that's basically what we're looking at here, that Tiglath-Pileser at this time has taken away for Assyria, and he's taken the people captive as well. And then verses 30 and 31, we have the end of Pekah's reign. If someone could read those two verses.
And Hoshea the son of Elah led conspiracy against Pekah the son of McElyea, and struck him and killed him. So he reigned in his place in the 20th year of Jotham the son of Uzziah. Now the rest of the acts of Pekah and all that he did, indeed, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel.
Pekah's reign ended just like it began, except this time he's not the one leading the conspiracy. He's on the other end of the conspiracy. Hoshea the son of Elah comes, leads the conspiracy, strikes him, kills him, and then takes over the throne in his place. And this is during the 20th year of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. And so the kings had changed now in Judah, and we're about to be looking at Jotham's reign, but this just gives us the time frame. So we've been just zooming through the history of Israel, and now we're about to be jumping back to Judah looking at Jotham. But as far as Pekah, the rest of his acts, verse 31, all that he did, they could go back and look at those things. But as we've been saying all along, we know what we need to know about Pekah. He was an evil king, and also we find that this is the point in time at which chunks of Israel are beginning to be taken away to Assyria, and part of the people are beginning to be led away captive. But we're just working more and further closer to the destruction in the end of the northern kingdom. So that is Pekah's reign. And now we'll look at Jotham's reign. This brings us back to Judah. Somebody read verses 32 and 33.
In the second year of Pekah, the son of McElyea, king of Israel, Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok.
Back to Judah, we see Jotham, the son of Uzziah, now reigning as king. He became king during the second year of Pekah's reign in Israel. And so that can give us some time frame there that Jotham was the king in Jerusalem at the point in time at which Tiglath-Pileser was beginning to take away parts of the land from Israel and leading some of them into captivity. But verse 23, we find that he's 25 years old when he became king. He would reign for 16 years. And so if my math is correct, that puts him at 41 years old when he would pass. And then it tells us who his mother was. His mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. Now, with Jotham, one of the things that we can mention to help give more time frame here is if you look at the book of Micah. Micah chapter 1 and verse 1 lets us know that Micah's prophetic ministry was taking place during the time frame of Jotham. And so that gives us more of that full picture that, you know, if you're able in your personal study and your daily readings, if you want to go back and read the book of Micah, that can help give a fuller picture of what all was taking place at this time frame. But let's look now verses 34 and 35, where we'll see the character of Jotham's reign. Somebody read verses 34 and 35.
And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. He did according to all that his father Uzziah had done. However, the high places were not removed. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. He built the upper gate of the house of the Lord.
So unlike the kings in Israel, who everything was just bad and terrible about them, now we at least see a little bit of good here. But the good is only to a certain extent. Because Jotham was good and did what was right according to the ways of whom? His father Uzziah. Now, thinking back to Uzziah, what is it that Uzziah had done? He did what was right in the sight of the Lord up to a point. But do you remember what we read in 2 Chronicles? Would have been in chapter 25 or 26 that we looked at it, where Uzziah had all of these great successes and all of these great victories and was building up strong defenses and everything else until he got too strong in his own eyes. Then he entered into the temple, and he went to the temple to burn incense and make an offering himself. And it was there that you had the priest Azariah with 80 other priests withstand the king and stand up to him and be bold and tell him, you have no business here. This is not your place. This is not your role. Well, that was Uzziah's problem. His pride, his strength led to his downfall. And so this tells us then, even if we don't know anything about Jotham's reign yet, when it tells us that he did according to all that his father Uzziah had done, then this tells us that he's going to do some good things, yes, but there's going to be some point in there that he loses sight of what is good and what is right. Now, it's interesting, I think, from 2 Chronicles chapter 27. 2 Chronicles chapter 27 and verse 2, that it actually specifies right there that he did not enter the temple of the Lord. And so he did follow the way of his father, except unlike his father, he didn't actually go into the temple and begin to try to burn incense like his father. And so that just is a reminder, at least, of the problem that Uzziah had done when he went in the temple and tried to burn that not even his son would attempt to do something such as that. Of course, his son would have obviously learned the lesson whenever he couldn't be around his father anymore, because his father was struck with leprosy and had to dwell in isolation for the rest of his days. But that gives us at least the beginning picture that he was good, did what was right up to at least a point. And then we also find, though, at the beginning of 2 Kings 15, verse 35, the bad that took place in his reign, because Jotham still had his problems. However, the high places were not removed. They didn't take the high places away, and the people continued to sacrifice there. They still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. The way that 2 Chronicles 27 and verse 2 puts it, if you look at the end of that particular verse, it tells us that the people still acted corruptly. And so there were still problems going on, that even though he did some things that were right, he was not actually working to try and shift the culture of the entire nation back to God to do what was right. But within his reign, then it gives us a little glimpse at the end of verse 35 about some of what he had done, at least some of his construction projects. It tells us that he built the upper gate of the house of the Lord. Now, why he would have to build this upper gate, we don't know specifically. Maybe it's the case that this was a needed renovation, because one of the things that we learn from the prophets is that during the reign of Uzziah there was an earthquake in Jerusalem. You look at Amos chapter 1 and verse 1, as well as Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 15, and it just gives a mention of this earthquake that happened during the reign of Uzziah. So we don't know for sure, but maybe this earthquake had caused some damage to the temple, and now this needed renovation was necessary. That's why it would be needed. Needed, it's necessary. Anyway, getting ahead of myself in my brain here. So he he renovates this, builds the upper gate at the house of the Lord. And we also learn, if we look at 2 Chronicles chapter 27, about some more of Jotham's construction projects. If we look there at 2 Chronicles 27, and there is something important from that particular chapter that I want us to consider. 2 Chronicles 27, if we start looking in verse verse 3. It says that he built the upper gate of the house of the Lord, and he built extensively on the wall of Ophel. Moreover, he built cities in the mountains of Judah, and in the forests he built fortresses and towers. He also fought with the king of the Ammonites and defeated them. And the people of Ammon gave him in that year 100 talents of silver, 10,000 cores of wheat, and 10,000 of barley. The people of Ammon paid this to him in the second and third years also. Verse 6, so Jotham became mighty because he prepared his ways before the Lord his God. Verse 6 is key. Why was Jotham having these successes? Why was he helping the nation prosper? Why was he able to strengthen these defenses and be able to go through with all of these building projects? He was obedient to the Lord. Because the Lord was making him prosper. The Lord was making him mighty because Jotham prepared his way before him. But we're also going to see in this a good application point, I believe, as we keep reading through and see what's happening at the end of Jotham's reign. Somebody read for us now back in 2 Kings 15. Let's have somebody read 2 Kings 15 verses 36 through 38.
Now the rest of the acts of Jotham and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? In those days the Lord began to send Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, against Judah. So Jotham rested with his fathers and was buried with his father in the city of David his father. Then Ahaz, his son, reigned in his place.
Verse 36, like it does with all the other kings, lets us know there was more that was done. They would be able to go and reference those things and look at all of that history, but the history we have is enough to tell us, a little bit about these kings. But verse 37 then lets us know that it was in those days, so in the days that Jotham was still king, what started taking place?
The king of Syria and Pekah from Samaria.
Okay, so now you have the king of Syria and the king of Israel coming against Judah. Well, at the same time all of this is going on, at some point in Israel, you're also going to have the king of Assyria coming to attack Israel. That's going to be important to remember, at least once we get into chapter 16 and start looking at Ahaz and some of what Ahaz does. But that time was marked by a lot of unrest and a lot of battle and war going on. But in Judah, you have the king of Syria and the king of Israel coming in to attack, beginning to try and pull land away. How it is that they were coming in, attacking, doing everything that they did. But Jotham, we know, was still at least a somewhat good king. The Lord was making him prosper as long as he was continuing to follow in him. But there's still this particular judgment that's coming against the nation of Judah. May not necessarily be judgment against Jotham individually, but perhaps still just judgment on the nation as a whole. Whatever the case, we know based on that introduction to his reign and the character, looking at it, that Jotham didn't do anything to try and move the people back closer to God, but he allowed them to continue to go to their high places, to make their sacrifices and burn their incense to the false gods and all of their idols. And so God, of course, is going to have to do something to judge the people. And he's doing this by the hands of Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the king of Israel. And of course we think, well, why might the Lord have been sending this judgment upon them? Well, because they're caught up in false worship and idolatry. Because the people aren't turning to him. Back to what we saw in 2 Chronicles 27 and verse 2, the people still acted corruptly. They were not concerned with what was right, and God had to do something in order to try and bring them back. His patience, of course, is there, His mercy and His grace, but God had given them plenty of opportunity and plenty of chance, and now this is just another opportunity for them to do what was right. But when we factor in all the defenses that Jotham had built, the way that he had strengthened the nation based on what we saw in 2 Chronicles 27, And we saw how it was that he had victory and success against the Ammonites, and the Ammonites would pay in, at least in the first, second, and third years of his reign, and pay tribute there, which would help fund all of those defenses and the strengthening of the nation. But now we see that none of that mattered. What kind of a lesson might we learn from that? You can build all the forts that you want. You can strengthen your army and do all the training and everything else that you want. You can be as strong and as mighty as you want to be. But if you're doing all of that without God on your side, none of it matters at all. Even wicked kings like Pekah, even pagan kings like Rezin, they can come in and take it all from you. If God's not on your side, none of that matters. And I think that's a good lesson for us to consider, because the people were still acting corruptly. The people were not concerned with doing what was right. And we know, at least to some degree, Jotham's faithfulness and obedience was not as David's, but it was more like his father Uzziah's. That there would be a point in there perhaps that Jotham was going to turn from what was right and do what he preferred instead. And then we come to verse 38 in the end. We look there at verse 38 when Jotham dies and he is buried, and then we learn that his son Ahaz would replace him as king over Judah. And that finishes out chapter 15. Now, for our takeaways from this chapter, there's a lot, obviously, that's going on here. And some of it begins to start to sound very repetitive. And I believe there's a reason for that, because all of this is trying to show us how quickly and how rapidly things are starting to deteriorate, especially in Israel. But we began by talking about the king in Judah, who was King Uzziah. The lesson that we learn from him is that pride is deadly. Of course, to recognize this requires us to look in the Chronicles, but all of it is connected and combined. That Uzziah, his downfall was his pride. That led to his leprosy, led to his ultimate and untimely death. And we talked a lot about some good application that we can learn from that, of how pride is a spiritual leprosy, and all of the ways that that affects not just ourselves, but even the people around us. Pride is deadly. We also find that sin and corruption leads to more sin and corruption. And this, I believe, helps explain perhaps why everything starts to sound so repetitive. That this king was evil, and this king did this, and then this king killed that king so he could become king, and then the rest is written here, and then he was buried with his fathers. And then this king was an evil king who began reigning at this time, and then he was killed by this guy who then became king, and then he died, rested with his fathers, and then so on and so forth, right? It starts to sound pretty repetitive, and you have to keep looking back to see, okay, what king am I talking about now? Because this sounds like what happened to this king, and then that king before him. Well, sin and corruption is only going to lead to more sin and corruption unless we are willing to actually stop and make the necessary changes in our lives. Shows us that in the history of Israel. The same will be true for the history of America, but we want to get closer to home. The same is true in our own personal lives. The same will be true within the church if we do not take care of sin and corruption, and because it will only lead to more if we do nothing about it. And then lastly, the Lord is in control. Didn't hit on this specifically, but we can look at it right now and think about it. In the judgment that's going on, thinking right now about what we have in the reign of Jotham, the judgment that comes against them. Look at verse 37 again. Who is it that is actually doing all of this? It's the Lord. In those days it says, the Lord began to send Rezin king of Syria and Pekah king of Israel. The Lord is the one who was in control, who had all authority. That He is sovereign, as we've talked about before, not just over His own people, but over the nations that didn't care anything about Him or even think anything about Him. God was still in control. He still had all authority. He was still sovereign. Even in those nations, or even in His own nation of Israel, where the kings were just getting more and more corrupt, and there's all of this civil unrest, and they're killing each other so that someone else can become king, and then someone will kill him so that they can become king. And in the midst of all of that, it could very easily begin to look like, where is God? God was there. God was in control. The people needed to turn to him and follow him. Paul?
Say, showing God's ultimate love for mankind, where they all had the free will to make those decisions. And somebody could, all the atrocities that went on, he could say, no, stop it. No, stop it. With giving man free will to say that he could change. He had the opportunity to change. He had the opportunity to do right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's ultimate love right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, they had the free will to make the choices, and within each of those choices that were made, and within the actions of each of those kings, every time was an opportunity for the people to stop and reflect and want to turn back to what's right. I can't help but wonder, just thinking back to Menahem where we started this morning, you look at what Menahem did and the type of king he was, and especially early on in his reign, where it begins with the assassination, and now he says, I'm king. And then he goes to this to Tipsah, and he's going to go there. The people don't surrender, and so he's violent against them. Did the people stop and wonder, how did we get to this point? How did we reach a point that we now have a leader who's acting just like all these other leaders? Was there ever a point in time in his reign or in one of the other evil kings' reigns that the people started to really stop and reflect and wonder, maybe the reason's because we've turned away from God? That whenever it was the case in our nation that we were more loyal to God, things were much better. We were a united people. We had great things going on in the reign of Solomon, great things happening in the reign of David, right? And what's the difference? Kings who are focused on doing what's right, kings who are focused on God, more of that within the nation itself. But if we think about things that happen today, each of the things that go on are opportunities for us to stop and reflect. Something terrible happens in our nation. It's an opportunity for us all as a nation to stop and reflect. Now, sometimes as we look at these things and we talk about the nation of Israel, the nation of Judah, it's easy to make application to the nation that we live in. But of course, the true spiritual application comes back to the church. Something happens within the church, whether it's here, whether it's in a neighboring town, whatever it might be. Something happens against people who are teaching the truth of the gospel. Sometimes those things are done as a way for us to be able to stop and think and reflect and examine to make sure that, okay, we're doing the right things here. Yes, there are times that bad things may happen, but is it because we've brought it on ourselves, or is it persecution from outside? A lot that could be said as it relates to these things, and a lot of good lessons to learn. And of course, these are just 3 of them. But yeah, I appreciate that you bring that up, Paul, about the free will and all of this. So that's 2 Kings chapter 15. And Lord willing, next week we will pick up looking at 2 Kings 16 with the reign of Ahaz.